All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. You guys thought I was escaping. You thought you could do this without me, but no, it's not. And by the way, I've been doing this meeting now here for, I think, the last 4 years, and nobody's yet ever sat in the front row. So I'll just have to take all my $5 bills from underneath the seats when I leave. So thank you for coming. For those of you that don't know me, Rich Fuchs, the current president, at least for a few more minutes, of SHPOA. We've got quite a presentation today. Some really, really interesting information for you on some topics that we think are really pertinent to Stone Harbor today, but potentially even more significant for Stone Harbor going forward. So we're fortunate to have some very, very, I'll say, expert speakers on those topics. And so with that, I'm not going to spend much time saying anything other than welcome, enjoy. For those of you that may wish to see this again, if there's something you missed or that, it is being recorded and will be up on the SHPOA website in a matter of days. So please, and if there's something you feel that your friends and neighbors who may not have been able to attend should see, again, please reference them to the SHPOA website. So let me start off with the agenda. As I said, a few opening remarks. We have a couple of administrative tasks. That is the ratification of new trustees and our new slate of officers for the coming year. My colleague Geoff is going to then introduce and present the donations for the Harbor Hustle. For those of you that were here in June, you may recall that we had the 5K race at the end of June. Very successful. We're really thrilled with the outcome. We had more runners than we've had in the past, and we're able to raise nice sums of money for two very, very worthwhile organizations in time. So we'll be dealing with that. We'll announce the photo contest winners. We had quite a number of submissions. I think it was over 160 submissions for the photo contest. Some excellent photos. And so we have the winners that have been selected by you, the members, and we'll be presenting those. And then our featured talks. We're going to have Dr. Tedesco, Lenore Tedesco from the Wetlands Institute, come and speak about some issues around bay dredging and a lot of really interesting work that they've been doing around what's known as beneficial use. She presented this at Council, I think the last Council meeting, and it was very, very fascinating. I learned a lot, I must say. So I think this will be very informative. And then finally, we're going to talk about REAL. This is something that's hot on the agenda for the state, and is going to have potentially very significant impacts on coastal communities. So I think that's something you'll find of interest. So I get this to work? There we go. Oh, sorry. Again, some thank yous. As always, Harbor Square Theater very generously donate the use of this really fine facility. For those of you that remember the years that we were out on the basketball court in the wind at 82nd Street, I think you'll agree this is a much more comfortable setup than we were using then. So again, many, many thanks to Harbor Square Theater for the generous donation of this facility. There we go, come on. Oh, gosh. And once again, as always, our good friend Sam Weirman from ID Insurance sponsored the refreshments. Hopefully you had the opportunity to have some coffee and some Danish this morning, and Sam has, for many years, generously sponsored this. So again, thank you to Sam and to his firm for his generous support of SHPOA. So I'm going to do a couple quick introductions. First, I want to introduce, I saw a few members of Council. In fact, several of them are sitting right here. So Councilwoman Gensimer has joined us. Councilman Carney's joined us. Borough Administrator Manny Parada has joined us. I was looking, did I see the Robin or Bunny? I was kind of in here, and they almost always attend. I'm sure they'll be in. They usually come in, so they'll be here. I would like to take a moment and acknowledge the trustees. We have a group sitting right over here. These are the SHPOA trustees. Really hardworking bunch of people. They've made my life incredibly easy for a number of years. And so on behalf of everyone, I want to thank you all for your time, for your energy, and for your support. You've been a great group of trustees. There are a couple trustees who are not with us whose terms have expired, and they will be leaving the Board of Trustees. The first is Beth Toolin, Beth has been a trustee for 6 years, and I have a feeling somehow we're going to keep Beth engaged in some way because her passion for sustainability, and in particular water conservation and the plantings, et cetera, is unmatched by anybody. In fact, you'll see one of the project of the year that we're moving forward with is there's going to be an island planted. I think it's 114th Street? 109th Street. So we're working with the borough, and the Public Works has graciously donated a lot of time and effort. We're going to replant that island with native and sustainable plants as a demonstration of what can be done to help reduce the use of water by having these types of plants. The Garden Club is very actively engaged with us in this. They're a real partner in this effort that we're all trying to do around how do we continue to keep Stone Harbor beautiful, but how do we do it in a way that conserves and uses less water and conserves as much water as we can. So look for that next spring. Go bypass and have a look. I think you'll find it to be rather interesting. It's been a lot of work in the effort. Beth's been key to that. So again, Beth, thank you. Jay Blackman is another trustee who's departing. His term has expired. Jay ran our community engagement committee, so he organized all this stuff for the last several years. And we'll miss Jay and his efforts. And Paul Grady, for those of you that read The Beach Buzz, Paul Grady was our treasurer and served on the board for a number of years. Paul resigned as treasurer in the summer as he's moved from Stone Harbor. So we'll miss Paul. We have been blessed to have a very, very capable successor. But yeah, we'll miss Paul and we'll miss his efforts. So those three trustees are not going to be coming back and being renominated. The first effort here, the first administrative effort is we do have a new trustee. New trustee nomination. As you may be aware, under our bylaws, the trustees and the officers are recommended by the board, but you, the members, have the vote, the final say on whether they will be appointed as trustees and or as officers. So Heather Steinbach is sitting over here. She's graciously volunteered to join the board this year as a trustee. She was unanimously recommended by the Board of Trustees, so I ask you, the members, by a voice vote for your agreement, your assertion as to Heather joining the Board of Trustees SHPOA. So all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, anybody opposed? I told you, Heather, she was worried. I said, nobody ever opposed you. So anyway, Heather, congratulations. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to your time and your energy with us. We have a trustee who is agreed to accept the second term, Susan Barrett. Susan has been the chair of our sustainability committee for the past couple of years. She's worked closely with Geoff on sustainability issues. She, along with Beth and the entire sustainability committee, are really driving some of the initiatives going forward. So Susan has graciously agreed to serve a second term. Under our bylaws, trustees are permitted to serve 2 consecutive 3-year terms. The trustees have, again, unanimously recommended Susan for her second term, so I ask you again, the members, to provide your feedback. So all those in favor of Susan for a second term, please say aye. 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 Anybody opposed? Okay, thank you. Finally, the last thing is the officers. So we have a new officer nominee slate. Every other year, we have 3 officers. Officers have 2-year terms. Every other year, 3 officers come forth for either renomination or to take on a role as officer. This year, we have a slight change, and there'll be, as you see, 4 names there, and that's because Chris Yates has been nominated by the board to serve as president. Chris is our current vice president, and so therefore, with Chris stepping up to the role of president, we needed to fill the role of vice president. Homi Kapadia, who's our current chief information officer, has agreed to serve in that role and has been recommended by the trustees. Chuck DeLone, and it's DeLone, not DeLong, but Chuck has agreed. Chuck took over from Paul as the interim treasurer when Paul stepped aside. Chuck has agreed to step forward and serve a 2-year term as our treasurer. And finally, Scott Jardin. Scott's in the back. He's been our cameraman and our information man for a number of years. Scott has agreed to accept the nomination to become the chief information officer, replacing Homi. So again, they're recommended by the Board of Trustees, but it's you, the members, that decide. So with this slate of officers, I'd ask for your agreement. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Chris, I thought for sure your wife was going to come back and say no. I was waiting for that. So anyway, thank you. Okay, so our officers are approved, our new trustees are approved. We have a board going forward for 2024, 2025. Thank you all very much. Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to turn it over to Geoff, who's going to talk about the 5K, our Harbor Hustle. Geoff was the chair of the committee that kind of organized that, and make the presentations. So, Geoff?
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank our sponsors for the race. Seashore Ace was our premier sponsor. And as you can see, we also had 4 gold sponsors, Cohogs and Jay's Restaurant, Global Pursuit, and TS Air Sciences, which people are going to say, I don't think I've shopped at them in Stone Harbor. Beth Toolin, the aforementioned former trustee, that's her company, and they also helped sponsor the race. So I want to thank them very much. This is our second year for the race. We moved it this year from August to June to coincide with the summer solstice. And on a forward basis, that will be the date for the race. We had a 35% increase in the number of runners, participants. We had a 35% increase in the donations raised. So it was a very, very successful race. And we're continuing to work with some actual professionals in the racing community. One who's a former Stone Harbor Beach Patrol person who now does this for a living up in New York City. They're the New York Roadrunners that run the New York City Marathon, amongst others. And really have goals to try to make this even a much bigger and actually a premier race in South Jersey. So we have some big hopes there. So what we would like to do at this point is ask the recipients from the Diller Vacation Home. Is someone here from Diller? Yes, very good. And also from the American Legion. I saw Tom, they're sitting up front here. And if I could ask our trustees for some help with this. You know, it's not a donation without the big check. So thanks to the Big Check Company. It costs more to get it delivered than it does to have them printed. But we raised a total of $6,000, which was divided evenly between the 2 organizations. And as Rich said, very deserving local organizations for us. This is a great event where we can put money back into the community. And of course, these organizations do a tremendous amount for the community, both on the island and of course off island. And we really want to thank them for all the work that they do, and we're glad we could raise some money. So if you give a round of applause for these organizations, please. Okay, thank you very much. And yeah, take those with you so you can deposit them after the... Thank you, Tom. Okay. Now the photo contest. So I don't know how many years. Scott, how long have we been doing the photo contest?
This was the 9th year.
9th year. So we had 161 submissions, which was outstanding. And what we do is we're not going to send out 160 for you guys to try to vote on because your heads would explode. So the trustees try to narrow that down to the top 12. And then everybody gets a chance to vote on that. We had 401 people voting, so that was outstanding. That's really great. We have a lot of people voting. And of course, we give prizes for these, for 3rd, 2nd, and 1st place of $100, $150, and $250 gift cards. So I do happen to know that the winners are not able to be here today, but I do want to go through who they are. So the 3rd place, Christy Naselli, was our 3rd place winner with this great photograph. 2nd place, Patrick Surface, which was absolutely one of my favorites. And then our 1st place this year Jason Harrell, which I was particularly interested in seeing since he was staying at my house the weekend that he took this photo. But you can see he came back from the beach and said, "You will not believe what happened. I'm taking a sunrise picture and a dolphin jumped out of the water." So that was not photoshopped. It's a real thing. So sometimes getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning has its advantages. So I want to thank all the people, and I encourage people to submit photos. I see stuff, Craig Miller's here somewhere, I saw him, but I see stuff, okay, there he is up there, on Facebook all the time, just taking great shots. I steal a lot of his. There were at least several of his in the coming attractions that we were running before we got started here. But great number, of course. 7 Mile Island has such a great number of areas to take great shots. It's easy to do. Okay, our first door prize. So everybody that checked in should have a ticket. If I can ask you, Justine, to pick a ticket out here. And the number.
Sure, the number is 5411269. It's a red ticket. There you go.
Ends in 69.
Yes.
Want to take that up? Okay. The other ones will come a little later. And so moving along here, I'm going to now pass it over to fellow trustee, Mike Walker, who is going to go through a very, very brief overview of where we stand from Back Bay dredging. And then we're going to go into our first presentation.
Thank you, Geoff. And I got the message very brief. So the dredge report. So I'm going to talk about dredging Stone Harbor lagoons, 5 minutes, and then the star of the dredging show will follow me. So Stone Harbor, our last dredge was 2016-2017, so a bit of time ago. And since that dredge, every year, the Stockton comes in and does this review of the depth of the lagoons to check to see what's happening with the deposition of sediment. And as expected, we have sediment deposition that's continuing to accumulate in the lagoons. There's an additional report on 2024 on hotspots. I'll get to that in a second. So the question is it time to dredge again? The answer is, all the suspense out? No. There won't be any dredging in the Stone Harbor lagoons in 2025, and I'll explain the reason for that in a second. But I thought for grounding purposes, it would be helpful to think about the issue of cost versus need. And when you look at the cost for dredging, you can read on the screen here all the direct costs that are involved. And in 2017, the last dredge we did, there was a cost, the estimate for the cost was $11 million, and it came in a little bit under that. But you think 2017 it was $11 million, what would it be in 2025? So we're talking about a pretty big cost item in terms of dredging. And then there are the indirect costs, and there's this organization, SHPOA. Have you heard of that, Rich? These guys are good because they wrote a very good report on the last dredge with some of the lessons learned and what came out, and some of the things that are indirect costs you don't think about. But all the trucks that were taking all that sediment in and out of taking it out of the town had a big impact on the roads, on the utilities underneath the roads, the noise, and the air quality. So there are some indirect costs as well as the direct costs. So this is a big decision to make. So in terms of the need, think about this issue of hotspots. And Manny Parada sitting up here had a great idea to do, in that Stockton report, normally we just get the depth, but his idea was to look at the hotspots that are 2 feet higher, hotspots meaning that where the sediment is 2 feet higher over 2017. I have to give Manny a shout out thinking of him because we spent a lot of time this summer talking about dredging. He did a great job with my education, which I really appreciate. But this 2 feet thing is very important, and I'll show you why in a second here. So when you compare the lagoon depth with the hotspots, then you get a sense about where or whether or not dredging is needed. So the conclusion is when you look at the hotspots and the depth report, that the navigation is not impacted, dredging won't be needed. There are some areas near the bulkheads where if you're a owner who has property up against the bay, the bulkhead, you know, your property extends 30 feet into the bay. That area is not the borough responsibility, and there's some buildup there. That's not an area for the borough. I'm going to do just to give you an excerpt of one page from the hotspot and one page from the depth report, so you get a sense for how this decision was made. If you want to know more about specific bays, Mandy gave a full presentation at the August 20th meeting for the Borough Council work session, and everything is there. His presentation about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation. So here's a slide showing the hotspot report, and you can see right here, this area that's outlined is an area showing where the sediment has accumulated in this bay. So we're talking about the North Lagoon here, North Basin. And there are a couple other areas here that are also hotspots. But when you look at this, the depth, when you look at the mean low, lower water depth, there's plenty of space here, so navigation is not impacted. And the area that we saw that had the hotspot is right here, and so maybe with the storm over the winter, that would actually empty out anyway. So the navigation is not impacted despite the hotspots. So that led to the conclusion, no dredging in 2025, so we'll keep an eye on this, obviously, with the Stockton doing their report next year and continue to look at it. The last point about the hotspot is a good idea is maybe to keep the cost down, maybe just dredge hotspots in the future, but a decision to come in the future. So that's my 5 minutes. Let me give you. So, I'm not checking my email, but give me a second here. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Tedesco. Dr. Tedesco, she's the executive director of the Wetlands Institute. She has a PhD in marine biology and geophysics from the University of Miami, Rosenstiel College of Marine and Atmospheric Science, and a bachelor's degree in geology from Boston University. Her research interests are in wetland, estuary, and stream restoration and environmental education. Since she came to the Wetlands Institute in fall of 2011, Dr. Tedesco has focused her research and conservation activities on coastal and wetland ecosystem dynamics and restoration. Her current projects are focused on evaluating the impact of sea level rise on wetland and coastal ecosystems, designing and constructing beneficial use marsh restoration projects, and the use of nature-based solutions to control risk reduction and build coastal resilience. Here we go. Dr. Tedesco, here we go.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out and giving us an opportunity to share some of our work today. I did do a much briefer presentation at Borough Council, so I'm just going to give you a little bit more detail. I will be brief, though. I've been warned about that. There are lots of folks working on this project. I'm just listing a couple of the other folks here. The Army Corps and the State Fish and Wildlife folks are a key component of this project. Real quickly, I'm going to remind everybody about the Wetlands Institute. We're now a 54-year-old organization. We're a nonprofit. Obviously, we work on coastal and wetland ecosystems. We have an 18-member board of trustees. We're actually a very large staff. I think folks don't understand how many folks work there. We're 19 full-time folks. We have about 35 seasonal staff that come in and out, so at times we're over 50 folks working there. We have 19,000 visitors, 14,000 school kids annually come through there, and we're member-based with about 1,300 members in 48 states and Canada, so we're not actually local. Many of you know about our education programs. That's your touchstone to us. We do formal education programs, field trips. We travel to groups. We actually serve New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and all of New Jersey. And then we have Scouts and homeschool programs. And of course, if you come to the Institute, you can have general public tours, guided walks. We also have an intern program for environmental educators, as well as summer nature programs. We've been running at 99% on the summer nature programs, and they fill up within hours of opening, so we'd like to have more capacity. Our research is focused in several different areas. One of the key components of the Institute that is, I think, most distinctive is we house research, education, and conservation under one umbrella so that they talk to each other. We do applied research. that informs the best way for conservation, and then we embed that into our education. They're not distinct and they don't operate separately. So we work on marsh health and sustainability. I'll be talking about that today. We do a lot of habitat restoration project for coastal birds. Many of you are familiar with the work we did at Stone Harbor Point. Diamondback Terrapin Conservation Program, of course, you know all about. The ethic here for terrapins and terrapin conservation is very high, and that's an important community program. We rescue horseshoe crabs. We've rescued over 1 million horseshoe crabs on the Delaware Bay in the last 10 years. And then, of course, we also have an intern program for research interns. So each year we host 10 undergraduate interns at the Institute. I want to now flip over and start talking about the value of coastal wetlands. I think many of you also know the value of coastal wetlands, but I want to really underscore it. First of all, they're beautiful, and we recreate in them, right? And you can't get past that. That's why a lot of us have chosen to be here. But what you might not have known is they're among the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. So they rival the diversity of tropical rainforests and coral reefs. And here they are right in our backyard. It's an added bonus. They also support fisheries and wildlife. 75% of our commercial food fish and shellfish rely on the wetlands for a component of their life. Without those wetlands, we see significant impacts to those resources. And of course, you drive by and you see all the birds and other wildlife out there. They're also really important for water quality. Part of the reason our waters are so clear is because water is filtered through these wetlands. And then for those of us interested in carbon and thinking about carbon, they store carbon at 10 times higher rates than mature tropical forests. So they're also really important at moderating climate. So maybe that's not super important to you. Maybe you want to think about coastal resilience and the protections we get from these wetlands. An acre of salt marsh absorbs about 1.5 million gallons of water. That's pretty significant. During storms, you already know, they absorb floodwaters and wave energy. So they decrease property damage, and NOAA reports as adjacent communities by up to 20%. On average, $695,000 of value per square mile during storms by reducing those impacts. This is dampening storm waves and absorbing water. And during Sandy, we saw that communities that were backed by healthy marshes, damages were reduced by 20 to 30%. So these are important numbers. These are important reasons to think about why we want to make sure we can maintain and restore and preserve our wetlands. But the NOAA report that just came out shows that we're losing about 80,000 acres of coastal wetlands annually, largely to sea level rise. And that's kind of a big topic. Like, well, what do we do about that? I've never been one, those of you that know me, to just be, doom and gloom. This is, it's a big problem, it's a big issue, but how do we address it? So the answer is, what if we could change that? And we've been working for the past 8 years to change that, and I'm going to talk about how we do that. I'm going to back up a minute, though, and talk to you about marshes and how they work. They're pretty remarkable. They're effectively at sea level, if you think about that. And they can keep up with sea level. As sea level changes, as sea level increases, they can keep up, they build up. And they do that by building dense root systems, and they also trap some sediment and mud in storms. And if the water gets turbid out there, it washes into the marsh, it can settle out. So the daily tides are really important to nourishing the marshes, and then full moon tides, right? You see in the full moon tides, the water is actually higher. So in this diagram here, the dark blue is kind of a low tide number, and the lighter blue is high tide, and you can see the water level fluctuates in the marsh. But it's always just at about, it should be right about at the marsh level. And in fact, they occur at these very narrow elevation ranges. If we start getting too much flooding, the marshes can start to drown. As the flooding gets higher and higher, it's like overwatering your houseplant. The growth rate slows. So at the same time you want them to grow faster, they're actually growing slower. So you get a negative feedback loop, and we could start to see marsh drowning. And I'll submit to you right now that we are seeing pretty extensive marsh drowning. This picture you probably recognize. This is up Highway 47 going out on the Delaware Bay side. And this is evidence. This is showing you sea level rise. So the marshes, they know the water's getting higher. They move to higher elevations. So they step landward. They just move landward. And what you see here, these ghost forests, that's the evidence of the salt water getting up into the forest and actually killing the trees. So this is a natural phenomenon. It's evidence of sea level rise where you could actually see it. And this helps that marsh just reestablish its position. So this is normal, but the problem we have is that in many places we've blocked that migration landward. The Garden State Parkway is basically a barrier to marsh migration up the entire state of New Jersey. So they won't migrate to the other side. So what happens then, in the other direction they might have migrated, is onto the barrier island on the bay side. We've effectively blocked both of those angles of migration. So we've boxed in the marshes, sea level's rising, and they can't move, and at the same time they can't move, the water's getting deeper, the growth is slowing, and marshes are starting to drown. That's the situation we're in right now. So I want you to get out your pens and papers, because there's going to be a quiz. So this is a tide gauge record showing sea level rise. This is actually measured water levels. Think about this like the float in your gas tank, measuring how much gas is in your... So this is measured. There's no estimates. This is actual. We use Atlantic City because it has such a long record. And what you could see in this gauge, it comes up and down and up and down and up and down. But here we are in 1910, and here we are in 2024. Okay, sea level has risen pretty significantly. The challenge we have in New Jersey is sea level's rising at 2 times the national average for an assortment of reasons. Islands sinking, you've heard about that. There's also differences in the way the circulation, there's a whole bunch of reasons this is happening, but sea level is rising very fast. It's risen 1.4 feet in 100 years. If I look at the long-term average, that red line, it's coming up at about 0.17 inches per year. But every time I give this talk, I have to go check, and they keep changing that number from 4.21 millimeters, because look at the red circle. The acceleration of sea level rise is pretty dramatic. So if I only look at the last 15 years, I'm at 1/4 of an inch a year. So the marshes are dealing with 1/4 of an inch a year, right? It's that longer term average is no longer relevant. And the challenge we have with thinking about predictions and projections is the curve is going like this. So all the long-term averages you get, when they're doing flood risk management, when FEMA's doing maps, they're using a 100-year record. But it's the recent term that's very different. So that's an important piece of this. If we get to about 0.15 inches per year or 4 millimeters per year, that's the limit of our marshes' ability to keep up. Okay, and we've measured that. That's kind of a number that's used widely, and we've actually measured it here, right in our marshes. So sea level's too fast for our marshes, currently, and projected to go faster. So what does that mean? This is work we're doing at the University of Pennsylvania, their environmental monitoring lab, and this is a map of, everything in green is a marsh. Here's Stone Harbor Point in yellow, here's the island, you can see the causeway in red, and that's what it looks like at high tide. This is a projection for 2035 high tide using a moderate sea level rise rate. We're not using extreme rates, we're using a moderate rate of rise. And that's what we're projecting in 2035. Every high tide, what the marshes will look like. You say, well, I'm not worried about that, that's 2035. That picture was taken this past winter. So it's already happening. You know this, right? You drive by, you drive the roadways, you've seen these marshes, they're underwater too much, too often, too deep. That's the reality. And it makes me sad, but what are we going to do about it? If I'm at the Wetlands Institute, I might be a little more concerned. Because we're the Wetlands Institute, not the Estuary Institute. It's really not funny, but so this is a 54-year-old building built to the appropriate levels of the times. This is the Marsh Trail, and it's underwater. The first time it went underwater on a sunny day, right? This is a sunny day. This isn't storm. This is the static water level. That's going to be something really important to think about. This is static water level. If I add storms on top of this, everything's going higher. So this roadway, if you walk the Salt Marsh Trail down to the dock on one of our programs, the first time it went underwater was 1986. It's in the Institute records. Everybody's freaking out. Oh my God, the trail's underwater. It goes underwater 70 times a year now. So I'm going to now show you some pictures. This is Stone Harbor Boulevard. Here's 96th Street Bridge. This is the area where we're going to do this project I'm going to talk about to restore the marsh, because this is about hope. This is about what we can do. This is what if we could change that, okay? That's my job here. So here, this star is where the Wetlands Institute will be in the future. This is 1956. You can see the very beginning of Stone Harbor Manor. For those of you that remember back in the day, this was the lumber yard. You can see they had a dock and everything coming in. This is the platform. So if you were at the Institute and you looked out, you would have just seen a beautiful meadow of grasses that are the marsh. there was one or two, keep your eye on those two pools that were deeper water pools where you see the birds hanging out, and there were these narrow tidal channels. That's 1956. If I scroll forward, here's 1963. They've now added, all the development is in here, right? They did all the fill. This is dredge material that was placed up on the marsh. Here's another place where that happened. So the folks would, anywhere there's been a channel, people put material on the marsh in the old days, right? And then that was no longer legal after 1972. But those spots are out there, and we'll talk about how important they are. Here's the first fill for what would become the Institute. Okay, so the Institute wasn't, we didn't fill the wetland to build the Wetlands Institute. It was built on an old fill pad. And here's a road. How many of you knew this road was here? So this was planned development. And in fact, that's what happened. The development failed, and the fill was there, so the Wetlands Institute ultimately bought it. But this road actually just blocks the tidal channel, comes along here, blocks that channel, blocks that tidal channel. You see these two guys keep that, but now you start seeing this weird stuff happening with the marsh. Here we are in 1970. There's those same two. Notice, remember, if those of you that have been at the Institute, you know that big water area right there? It's not there. It's marsh. And now you start to see this area is converting. You see these little pockets and pools? These are new marsh areas being lost. So this is marsh conversion to open water. When you hear people talking marsh loss, the marsh goes from the grassy wetland to a mudflat and then open water. We're losing marsh acreage here. That's 1970. Here's now the fill pad that will be the Wetlands Institute. Here's where you kind of go down to the area. You could also see this is probably in this picture, scruffy Phragmites, because somebody filled it and then left it, right? So this is like a weedy patch. The Institute was built 2 years later. Here we are in 2009. Do you see all of this? That's all marsh loss. Now, if you live on the bay and you've been looking out over the marsh and you're seeing that increase in open water on the marsh, that's marsh loss. That's us actually seeing this is the drowning of this marsh in here. These two are still there, but you can see they're kind of, I call them Swiss cheese marshes. You're seeing the remnants as the marsh fails. You're seeing the remnants of the marsh grasses there. That's 2009. Here we are today. Way too much water. These tidal channels are really big. All this is open water now. This is what it looks like from the air. This is my Swiss cheese marsh. This is what it looks like on the ground. That's all loss. So now what do we do about that? This is, again, our folks at the EM lab. Now this is the existing conditions. We mapped the whole area, and I know there's a lot of interest here about where you might be able to do, can the borough do beneficial use to try to save drowning marshes with their dredge material? Can that be a cost-effective way to do this? So if I look at this, everything in this light green is what you think of as marsh. When you just look out and see that grand expanse of grasses, it's all this light green. So keep your eye on all of this. Right, here's the free bridge on Nummi Island. This is the inset we call Scotch bonnet, and it gives you an idea. And you can see for this whole area, it's about 50% marsh. Up here, we're about 60% marsh. The blue is open water, the brown is mudflat. That's current. Here's the projections, 2050. So all of this that's brown is actually susceptible marsh to drowning. So in the event you did want to try to do a beneficial use project, you always have to establish need. Right? It's about marsh restoration. It's not about where am I dumping my dredge material. You can't get a permit to dump dredge material. You could potentially get a permit with the right set of science behind it to restore a marsh that's going to fail. And so these areas open up right away. This is the area, this is the Wetlands Institute. This is how much open water we're projecting by 2050. And I actually think this is underrepresenting some of these pools. So the idea was, can I do this? What can we do to restore this marsh? And that's the project we're about to start on, really basically next week. 7 Mile Island Innovation Lab, I've talked about a few times. This is this partnership with the Army Corps of Engineers, their research branch in the state, to try to figure out how we can do these natural and nature-based features. They're hard to do because you have to figure out how to do them. You have to create the engineering, creating the technology, and creating an ethic within the regulatory community to permit these things. And that's the rub. So by putting this group together, we said, hey, let's try some of these things because obviously we're losing marsh. And that's the rub, right? We're losing it. Doing nothing is causing harm. As soon as we got natural resource managers to understand doing nothing is causing harm, they started saying, okay, let's try some things. So the 7 Mile Island Innovation Lab is a test bed. It's nationally known, and it's doing great things. I'm really proud of this effort. Why we chose it, so it's this think tank, and the idea is how do we create these tools and techniques? It's based on an international concept by the Dutch. Everyone's excited about the Dutch, right? The little guy with his finger in the dike. It's because they're below sea level there. So that's a survival tactic there, so they're doing really cool things. It's the entire Back Bay area behind 7 Mile Island, so from Hereford Inlet to Townsend's Inlet, the mainland to the Barrier Island. We have a 50-member working group, folks from all over the country, and we have more than 30 scientists. That number's probably higher right now that are working in there. And all of these pictures are different things we've piloted and techniqued on how do you get the material. So this is dredge material from the dredging source, from the dredge being piped hydraulically in a water sediment slurry and placed on the marsh to do different things. And it's the hardest part about this, these are huge water management problems. This is 80% water, 20% mud. It's a fire hose. I think a fire hose is about 3-inch diameter pipe. These are 14-inch diameter pipes. Huge amount of energy coming out that we have to figure out how to manage. But this is what it looks like. But all of these tools were created in these projects. How does it work? So I showed you this example, okay, where the water level's right kind of at the marsh surface. We are currently in this scenario where the water is too high, too deep. So it's up too high on the water surface. So the way to combat that is to raise the level of the marsh so that the tidal inundation levels map back to this healthy marsh level. So the way we do that is to bring in that dredge material and place it on the marsh. And you can see it right here. And once I do that, I can reestablish those flood levels so that the marsh floods at the appropriate time and frequency. It's not going to look great because we just basically, you will bury the grasses that are out there, do get buried. It turns into a mud flat. And through time, the grasses reestablish. This is the rehabilitated marsh. But the levels are appropriate for that, and we found that we don't plant them, we let Mother Nature brings in the grasses. There's a ton of seed bank out there, and it reestablishes. We see it starts to reestablish on the second growing season. By the third, fourth growing season, we have a really nice marsh, if we get these elevations right. So this is the plan. This is what we do. This is called beneficial use of dredge materials. The dredge material has to be chemically clean, it has to be tested, and it has to be the right stuff. What it's made of, how far away. There's a whole bunch of things for constructability. But this is the approach. This is the number of projects we've done. Many of you have seen the first 2 projects were down here with sandy material to create bird nesting habitat. All of these up here would open up the football field. Those who used to run around in the football field, all of that material went to projects here. We're over 85 acres right now. We're expected to go over 100 acres with projects, the 2 projects that are coming now and this winter. And there's literally been millions of investments in federal dollars for the marshes, wildlife, and community resilience right here because of these projects. And New Jersey is a national leader in doing this. We have folks from all over the world, all over the country coming here to see how to do this. Natural resource matters, how do you do this? And we'll be demonstrating that. This is what it looks like. This is Sturgeon Island, which is about 70th if you go straight west. The Institute actually owns this island. This is what it looks like right after placement. The entire island was way too low. It was drowning. We put about 2.5 feet of sediment on it. So this is what it looks like right after. And you're like, wow, that's not good. This is what it looks like 2 years later. So we ended up offsetting that sea level rise by several decades. Just by adding that back. And it takes about 2 years to come in. You can see some of the Army Corps researchers out there. This is Gull Island. Again, this is one of my research team members. We're experts in how you walk on quicksand. I've read a lot about it. It turns out you actually can't sink, but anyway, that's the good news. Here it is in 2022, so 2 years later, you can see there's still some patches. It's irregular. It's not going to be one smooth surface, but neither are marshes now, right? They have highs and lows and pockets. And here we are in 2024. I just took this a few, filling in again. So rapid, and this is, again, these aren't planted. This is kind of on its own. And here's another example of another spot. This is a year later, and this has taken us out to 3 years later. So it works. We're always learning. Every project we do is to try to learn something new. which takes us to what we're going to do at Scotch Bonnet Island. So we're going to try to reestablish a healthy marsh. We're trying to go about 2 to 2.5 feet. I'm still working literally on exactly what the numbers are. We have to think about how high you construct because it dewaters, and also we're adding weight to a mattress, to a sponge, so it sinks. So you have to figure all that out. Do I go to 5 feet to end up at 3 feet? Do I go to 4 feet? So all of that's part of the work that we're doing and trying to generate models and work on all that. We're going to go to this area here, which is the lowest area by far on the marsh, and you saw that in that example. So we're going to try to bring this, build this up. I'm going to try to increase the marsh acreage, and we're trying to protect. So from my perspective, I'm trying to protect the Wetlands Institute for coastal resilience. If this goes to open water, I lose a lot of that coastal resilience. So, but this is the area of marsh. This is what some of it looks like. Again, this was all, I actually watched this change out my window since I've been there. This used to be all that marsh plain. We're expecting the seed bank to start in 2 years, maybe up to 5 years. You'll all have a ringside seat because every time you drive down Stone Harbor Boulevard, you'll see it. So you'll know how long it takes. Again, this is not good. Do you see all this? That is not what this marsh looks like. That used to be a solid grass plain. So we're going to be placing up in this area. Here's Stone Harbor Boulevard. Here's the Institute. This area in dark green is super low. That's the elevation of 0 to 1.8 feet. So we're going to there to try to help get it up. This entire platform, that red color, that's the appropriate elevation. That's what the marsh should be at relative to sea level. So the entire platform is too low. Okay, but I don't have enough material to do more, and we're probably going to end up, even shrinking this area more to get to the right areas. This is owned by New Jersey DEP. This is the Cape May Wetlands Wildlife Management Area. The boundary with the Wetlands Institute's like right there, so we'll both benefit. How do we do it? This is maintenance dredging by the Philadelphia District of the Corps. Those of you that run aground here and here will be pleased, because that's where the dredge material is coming from. Okay, so those are the dredging source areas. So yay. And then we have to get the material from there to here. It's going to be a pipeline. It may go this way. We're not sure yet. And it may go this way. We're not sure which way the pipeline's going to go. So it'll be a floating pipeline. It'll be buoyed. You'll see it. It won't interrupt navigation. It's Barnegat Bay Dredging Company. Late September, October, the first boots on the ground will be the 23rd to start laying out some of the pathways. The mobilization is 2 weeks, for those of you that want to know why it's so expensive. And then we're thinking, I'm guessing the week of October 1st, they might actually be starting to actually dredge. 6 to 8 weeks, going to move about 25,000 cubic yards of material. A dump truck is 10 cubic yards, if you want to think about what that actually means. This is, again, that's where we're going with it. This is one tool. We're probably not going to be rainbowing, but you'll see a dredge pipe out here, and you'll see material being placed. Again, here's the boulevard. Don't stop on the boulevard. You'll create an accident. Come to the Wetlands Institute. You can walk the trail system and see it. You can see it from the decks at the Institute. We are planning to have, right now I believe Saturday morning, we'll tell you when folks can come out. We'll have experts there to tell you what's going on, describe what's happening through the duration of this. So there'll be information there. I left information on the entryways, on a description of the project, how it's happening, and also how generally these projects work. We're going to be seeing, what you'll see right away, these coconut fiber logs. They're 100% biodegradable. They'll be staked in, and we'll use that to kind of direct the flows. So that'll be the first thing you see out there. So we just try to, again, it's water management. We want the water to go in a certain direction. We want the sediment to fall out. So that's kind of how it's not fully contained, but that's the idea. So you'll see those on the marsh. 2 years, they disappear. So they'll be gone. There's a ton of research happening out here. Again, we continue to think about how we do this. This is U.S. Naval Academy's running this guy. This is the Army Corps flying drones. My team's out. This is folks looking at geotech from there's Villanova's out here. There's a ton of research happening. This is going to be one of the most well-studied projects so that we could continue to learn how do we do the next thing. So we're trying some new tools here, some new techniques. I wake up in a cold sweat almost every night. Are we doing it right? I was up last night from 2 to 4, rethinking it. But that's what it is. It's incredibly important work. You will have a ringside seat. Literally, there are people already scheduled to be coming from all over the U.S., natural resource managers, to see how these are done because the proximity of this project. So there's a ton of info. If you hit that, we have a website that'll be hot and active. The tower cams at the Institute will be live. You'll be able to see it. If you just Google up onto our website and go to the tower cams, you can see it. We'll be doing, we're capturing a bunch of the imagery on a second camera, and we'll be doing time lapse. So we'll be doing a lot of stuff to keep the information available and open to the public. So come by. Don't get angry when you see a muddy looking marsh. We know it's going to look bad for a little while, but it's a really important project, and hopefully we can continue to advance this work so that there's more opportunities. We're trying to make these projects commonplace, create the tools and techniques people need to do this. We're working on the costs. We have the costs pretty close right now to the same as hauling it out and putting it in a confined disposal facility. So we're doing all those things to try to be able to replicate this. Everyone's like, well, how do you ramp this up, right? We have so much need. The good news is, maybe not so much, there's a lot of dredge material available. The reason the marshes, the bottoms are shallowing so fast is because the marshes are eroding so much because of all the tides. Every time the tides flood up onto the marsh, they're stripping some of the material. So that's lowering the marsh, raising the bottom. So it's actually the opposite of what we want. We want deeper channels and shallower marshes. So this is a way we can try to engineer it back the other way. So thank you. Good.
Okay, well, what we do is switch here. I'll introduce our next, thank you, Dr. Tedesco. Excellent. Our next speaker is Geoff Woolery. I think a lot of people know Geoff. He's been very involved with our community engagement effort as well as our sustainability effort, and he's a real expert on issues related to the beach and the bay, and so he is going to talk about REAL.
Folks, after Geoff does his presentation, we've tried to allot time for questions, both on this presentation, but also questions to Dr. Tedesco on the beneficial use of which she's just presented here. So please stay, hold your questions, and we will try to get to them after Geoff does his presentation.
More important than my presentation is the next gift card. Justine, if you again.
Okay, white ticket this time. And they, oh, no, wait a minute, here it is. The white tickets have their numbers in a different spot. 067025. That's 067025. Yay! Yes.
Oh, good. All right. So first of all, I want to thank Lenore again for that outstanding talk. You know, every time I hear talk going on about what we're doing, what's being done at the wetlands, I just am amazed at the fact that this facility is in our backyard. As she said, people come in from all over the country paying attention to what we're doing right here. And, you know, I remember when I used to live in downtown Philadelphia and visitors come in and say, let's go to the Liberty Bell. It's like, yeah, okay, we can go to Liberty Bell. It's like, I never go to Liberty Bell because it's in my backyard. I can go in whenever I want, so I never go. And sometimes, you know, the Wetlands Institute, if you haven't been there, get over there, see it. Great for kids, grandkids, so on. They're doing amazing work. When we were, as trustees, trying to decide on topics for today's presentation, we had a number of things. And Lenore's presentation was one that was at the top of my list. We had a couple other ones. And our executive committee really wanted to talk about some new proposed legislation that's coming in. And these were the two that we decided on. At the time, I didn't realize how well that they, at least in my mind, that they were going to integrate. And I actually saw Lenore's presentation. She gave this over at the Wetlands Institute a couple weeks ago. And so I'm going to, in this presentation, I will be talking about what is being proposed, but I want to give a little context, because I think context is very important. The why certain things are coming down the road. And so we'll go through what I'm going to call a case for action, what some of the key provisions are, and also the concerns. What I'm talking about today, Rich said an expert. I didn't know anything about this 6 weeks ago. I brought it to the attention because it was on the Borough Council had an agenda item where Lomax was coming in. I said, this looks really important. I think we need to pay attention to this. And so what I've done is gone out and adapted a lot of things from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection website, a number of federal websites related to climate change, and there's a Rutgers study that's been published that the state has been using to guide a lot of their activities. And I mentioned Lomax Consulting. They've provided some documents that are on the borough website that we're utilizing for this talk. So I'm just going to start with an overview. So what is real and who will be impacted? In essence, these are some policy changes that are coming down to a number of existing legislations across a wide variety of areas, including how we do our flood zone management, fish and wildlife, stormwater. So it's hitting across a number of different regulatory areas, and that's one of the things that's really different about this. It's not targeting individual ones. It's really an overview that's having impacts in a wide variety of areas. Why? Because of sea level rise, extreme weather intensification, and chronic flooding. And so in terms of who's going to be impacted, it's really any new development, redevelopment, renovation in flood risk zones. And because of some of these rule changes, these flood risk zones are greatly expanding. So it's not just new rules in areas that have them today, but a lot more area will be susceptible or will fall under these new regulations. And when we talk about rehabilitation or redevelopment, rehabilitation, we think about things that happen in Stone Harbor, right? So if you are knocking down a home and rebuilding, that's considered new development. If you're putting an addition on a home or some kinds of upgrades to a home, the trigger is actually pretty small. It's 50% of the cost of that redevelopment over the structure of the house, not the property value, right? A lot of our homes are, I think the average property value in Stone Harbor is $2.5 million. In many areas, 80% of that's in the land. So this is on the structure. And what that means is that trigger's reached pretty quickly. So anytime you're doing any major development, it's going to impact that. Why is this being proposed? Why now? The best available science indicates that our greenhouse gas emissions reductions that we're looking for are not going to meet the targets. And this is really due to two reasons. One, a number of renewable energy projects have been slowed down, put on the back burner. Think of what was going on with offshore wind and where that is right now. In addition, we keep the energy demand just continues to increase. And so we are asking more and more and putting more and more into the environment. Energy basically goes as population. And I think, the world's population is 8 billion. It's expected to grow to 10 billion in the next several decades. And that continues to put resource strain on our energy. And that's what we're facing. Also, Lenore mentioned, New Jersey is seeing sea level rise. That's twice that. I'm going to show a chart on this that we're seeing globally. So we're affected much more than a lot of other areas. And so the state is trying to react to that. Is the federal government doing anything about this? Absolutely. I think a lot of you are aware that FEMA has been basically encouraging changes to flood management in particular. The community rating system, we all heard the discounts on flood insurance. We lost a number of our discount points. And the team that Ray Parada is leading, is doing a great job at bringing that back for Stone Harbor. But this is how the federal government is actually trying to encourage municipalities to do the right thing. So this is not just happening at a state level, but it's happening at the federal level. Do you have the clicker? Oh, here it is right here. So this is a chart that I grabbed that I think is very, very instructional. So first of all, let's walk through this. So interesting, this is starting at today and going backwards. Notice, this is 400,000 years. Okay, so we're going back a days, even before I was born. And if you look here, what we're looking at is concentration of carbon dioxide, which is a primary greenhouse gas, and how it varies. You know, you always hear, oh yeah, CO2 is going up. We've been through this many times before, and we have. We've been through this many times before. Notice what's happening here. I'm going to talk about this. In fact, this is a little bit older graph I added. This is where we are today. So we literally are going through the roof, off the chart. And the important thing here is the greenhouse gas emission impacts global temperatures because you maintain the heat. It can't escape. And look how well that tracks. And then look down to sea level rise. And sea level rise for a number of reasons. Two of the most important, first of all, we all know when you heat something, it expands. So it doesn't take a whole lot of heat going into the sea to start expanding. But also, think of the polar ice caps. We have a lot of ice that's land today that's starting to melt and going into the sea. And that's two of the strong contributing factors to this. So Lenore was talking about the sea level rise. This shows you where we're looking at going back to the greenhouse gas emissions. So this is now a much shorter time frame. We're looking back over the last 60 years. And excuse me, my phone keeps going off. And if you look back here to 1960, these are now the amount of carbon dioxide. So this is the same scale we were looking at before. Before, we were oscillating, and 300 was kind of the limit. This is what we're seeing today, okay? This is that 430 that I put on the previous graph, where it's off the previous graph. So we have not experienced these levels before. We're in a whole new world in terms of how much we have. And if you look at the rate of increase, so this is just linear. If we were at the same rate back in this decade, we'd be here. We're not. We're up here. This is the same thing Lenore was talking about in terms of sea level rise and how it's increasing. And in fact, this is a similar thing, a shorter time frame here. Now we're going back to 1995. But this is that increase that Lenore was talking about, that the marshes are having problems keeping up with. And so all of this is very internally consistent in terms of what's going on. And then I mentioned about New Jersey. This was a chart that I found. These are, you can see the bottom one is global averages, and this is New York and New Jersey. And so New Jersey in particular has some land sinkage that's contributing higher, but as Lenore said, where you are geographically also has an impact. And so we're at the forefront of this, much more so than a lot of other areas. And so we're trying to get a handle on how do we deal with this. Now, this is out of a the Rutgers sponsored report that is really where a lot of the controversy comes in terms of what the state is doing. So there's a lot up here. Let me try to talk you through this. So the easy part, okay? This is timeline, okay? Here we are 2030 out to 2150, okay? And what all these numbers are is increase in sea level relative to where we are today, okay? So these are the additions that go on top of that. As you go from left to right, we're going out in years. As you go from top to bottom, these are all predictions now, right? Everything we showed you before is actual measured data. Now we're making predictions. So what is the probability? So these are probability ranges that certain numbers are going to happen. And as you get less and less probable, the numbers go up. So the question is, if you're planning on something, what numbers do you choose? We've got a lot of numbers up here. So what do we do for guidance? So what the state has decided is they're looking out at 2100, okay? End of the century. And they're looking at this 17% chance. And what this is on the right-hand side is the chance that sea level rise exceeds. So this isn't the level it will be, this is the chance that it exceeds that. So this is the number that they're taking a fair amount of criticism for. That's 5 feet. And I'll talk in a minute about how the 5 feet impacts what's going to happen here on the barrier islands. And the questions that have been raised are saying, well, geez, why aren't you taking the midpoint? Okay, it's a good question. Why aren't you taking the midpoint? And you can see, I want you to remember this number, this 3.3, that is the midpoint. And by the way, just for completeness, these emissions, low, moderate, and high, they've taken a midpoint there. This is just in terms of, there's a lot of things on the books that nations, this isn't a New Jersey issue, a US issue, you know, they call it global warming. It's impacted by what the globe is doing. And we keep falling farther and farther behind in terms of what our goals are, but they're still using a moderate point in terms of doing these projections, okay? So the 5.1 is what the state is looking at, and the question is, what about the 3.3? That has been raised many times. So one of the things, we're talking about projections, right? So how have we been doing in the past? So this is just a slide just talking about, if you look at some projections that were made in 1990, that were made in the 2000s, the actual sea level rise is exceeding the predictions that we've made in the past. So one of the concerns is, and part of this is we keep increasing, this rate keeps going up. So once, as Lenore said, you think you know what it is from your 100-year averages, and then you find out, no, it's all changing. It's changing very quickly. So one of the reasons that the state is saying we want to be more aggressive in this is because they're actually concerned that projections in the past have been underestimating this. So when we talk about sea level rise, we're talking about sea level rise just on your average tides, your high tides. We're not talking about storms. We're just talking about what happens every day. You know, we have 2 high tides every day, and mean high water, mean is just the average. The higher high is simply because in the 2 tides a day, one is higher than the other. So they take the highest of those 2 tides and they average it. They're the numbers we're talking about here. So there's that 3.3 that I was talking about before, 2100. So that is the expected mean high water. And if you look at that, if you pick that number as your assumption point, the point that I want to raise here is look at some of these other, so this is an annual flood. That means the percentage of the chance of having the flood is 99% in a given year, okay? You don't have to, that 3.3 happens in 2030. That's not, you know, way down the road. If you look at the 10% chance, okay, well, we've already exceeded that, right? Now that 5 number that they're talking about, that's not that far away. So one of the other reasons that the state is looking at a more aggressive number is it's not just what happens day in and day out. It's what happens when you have storms. And when we're talking about storms, we're still only talking about what's called tidal flooding. That's not due to rain coming down, that's due to the tide. We see it all the time, right? That sunny day flooding that we see. So part of the reason is not just the flood that's always going to be there, but the flood that's going to be there on maybe a weekly, a monthly, or an annual basis. So that's one of the reasons that they're being a little bit more aggressive. So what might this look like? So here's what REAL is coming in and talking about. Say this is your scenario today. And this picture may be not a great picture for us here because, first of all, this is kind of like looking out at the ocean and you say, well, where are the sand dunes? So maybe a better way to think about this is imagine we're sitting on the bay instead, okay? And so this is our bulkhead, and I put this in for a reason. These are our outfall pipes. You know, when it rains, the water has to go somewhere. And we do gravity drain from the streets, and it goes out into the back bay, okay? And I added this purposely at the level, you say, wow, that's right at the current sea level. Well, we get sunny day flooding at full moon, high tides, those kind of things. We see it all the time, right? So this is a good image of where we are today. So if we now take this and say, let's add that 5 feet, two key things happen here. First of all, notice that our outfall pipes are completely underwater and basically underwater all the time. So you have to do something completely different in terms of how you're going to account for stormwater runoff. Secondly, and most important regarding regulation, is there's this new shoreline. It's moved from here to here, and this is called an inundation risk zone. It's a whole new concept that the state has put forward, and so it is where the shoreline will move to with a 5-foot sea level rise. Why is that important? Because if you're doing any development, redevelopment, rehab in that area, then it's going to come under a whole new set of regulations because that area doesn't exist today. And so that's going to have a huge impact on the regs there. So where is that area in Stone Harbor? This is somewhat similar to what Lenore showed you. So here we are, and if this is something you can actually run on the DEP website, you can take a picture of anywhere and start raising and lowering levels, and you see where the water is. So this is, one more time. This is where all of the blue that is shown in there, this is all going to be the inundation risk zone. So if anybody has a home in this area, you will now fall under a new set of regulations to be determined. They're still working out the details of what that's going to be. And that's going to impact 65% of Stone Harbor will fall under this new zone. You can see where it is. Anywhere along the bay, from north to south, is going to fall in this zone. And as I think many people are aware, the island kind of is higher at the south end than it is the north end. So as you can see, this goes beyond 2nd Avenue and well into its way to 1st Avenue on the north end. So 65% is going to fall in this. So in part, what's this going to mean? So there's going to be some new building regulations. So as you increase your flood level, the state has something called your flood adjusted levels. These are impacting your first floor. So you know today you're in a flood zone. FEMA tells you how high you need to be, and that's where your first floor starts. Well, now this is going to come up from today's FEMA. It's going to come up 5 feet. And this is from the DEP website. So this is their scenario of here. One, you're going to have to raise your ground. And secondly, significantly raising the home. And again, who is this? This doesn't mean if you have an existing property and you're doing nothing to it, you need to do this. This is if you're doing redevelopment, rehab, which as you drive around, look at how many homes are getting knocked down or rehabbed, so on. And by one estimate, somebody told me about half of our properties in Stone Harbor are still quote unquote knockdowns, where the value of the land is so much higher than, or is a high percentage of the overall property that often when they resell, you see it all the time, they're getting knocked down. So even if it doesn't affect your property, it may affect your neighbor's property because this is now what's next door to you. And this is where a lot of concern is coming in terms of what it's going to mean for redevelopment. So, potential impacts. Stricter building standards for flood zone areas. By the way, with this new flood mapping, not only does 65% of Stone Harbor fall in this new inundation risk zone, which doesn't exist today, but we're going to go from, today 90% of Stone Harbor is in a flood zone. That's going to be 100% when this comes in. Okay? So new standards in a flood zone, that's the whole island, all of Stone Harbor. It's going to have certain limitations on redevelopment, and here's a key one. They talk about adaptive measures. What's an adaptive measure? I have no idea. But when somebody goes to redevelop, there's going to be a whole bunch of additional paperwork and criteria that they're going to have to go through before the permitting is allowed for this redevelopment or the rehab that you're going to do. Not surprisingly, there's concern that this is going to cause a lot of increase in costs and also in delays in terms of building. Shift in development patterns to less vulnerable areas. Now, that doesn't, in my mind, really apply to Stone Harbor. That's more mainland-related issues where you say, okay, you're not going to build here, you're going to build here, but if you own a home, you know, that's where the property is, right? And of course, as we know in Stone Harbor, for the most part, everything has already been developed. It's just getting redeveloped. We really don't have very much, quote-unquote, empty space that's developable today. It's a big concern about what this is going to have on property values. Today, you know, in the Inquirer, I think it was last year, there's a home on 111th Street and the beach. It's a turquoise home that a lot of people know. It's right down by the convent. And it's on a relatively small lot for beachfront lots, and it's a very old home. It sold for $10 million. It didn't sell for $10 million because of the home sitting there. It sold for $10 million for what you can build there, for the potential. So this is where there's a concern. What's going to happen to the potential? And there's a lot of uncertainty around that. And so that's a concern for people. And then just the infrastructure and compliance costs for local governments. Think about it, you're going to go into redevelopment, the developer is going to be sitting there and say, geez, how am I going to comply with all this stuff? What am I able to build? The architect's going to say, hey, what am I going to have to change? The construction office, Poire Poudre, is going to have to approve things and ask the question, did everybody meet all the criteria? It's a lot of education that has to go. And we all know when these regs are written, they're very ambiguous. How are they going to be interpreted? So there's a lot of confusion. And for me, this is, even if you ultimately get this right, which hopefully we will, it's the devil's in the details, but it's always transitions that are difficult, right? So in companies, there's this concept known as management of change. When you make changes in things, how you manage that change is absolutely critical. And to do that, there's got to be a lot of training and education, but it also takes time. And so one of the biggest concerns regarding this legislation is how quickly and how extensively things would need to be implemented. You know, who trains the people so they understand what they need to do to comply? So that's a very important component to this. So Cape May County is very, very concerned about this. And they're concerned, as I said before, about using this 17% probability in the 2100, that the probability is too low and the time frame's too far out. But remember, this is not just building a new home. This is building roads and infrastructure that the county's going to have to do, that the borough is going to have to do. So this is not just residential development. Lack of detailed economic assessment. What's it going to mean? Think of Cape May County, the peninsula. Most of the peninsula is in this inundation risk zone. You know, we got the Delaware Bay is only not even 10 miles away, right? So we've got water on both sides. There's a much bigger impact on Cape May County than really almost anywhere else in New Jersey. So there's a lot of concern. I mentioned the construction cost, decreasing amount of developable land. This is primarily a mainland concern, but if you look at an overview of Cape May County, like a Google map, there's a lot of undeveloped land there. What's that going to mean for this in terms of expansion for the future? Harm to the tourist industry, it's just an unknown. People are always afraid of, we don't know what's coming and how it's going to impact things, so there's concern. And so there have been resolutions of oppositions adopted by all 16 municipalities in Cape May County, including Stone Harbor a couple weeks ago. So that's kind of where things stand. And what I'd like to leave you with, as Lenore did, let's not be just doom. What can we do about this? Actually, Stone Harbor has been doing a pretty good job of getting ahead of the curve on this. And actually, with the help of the Army Corps engineers, let's start on the ocean side in terms of the water coming in. That's the big body of water. 2002, I think it was, we established the Dune project with one of our beach fills. And for those of you that don't remember, this is what 103rd Street looked like in 1998 after a storm. How many people remember the rocks that are long since buried that are next to the bulkhead? But this is what it used to look like, okay? And now look at it today. So we are in really, really good shape on the ocean side because we have we have man-made dunes that are out there that are protecting us. Bayside protection. So Stone Harbor has been changing ordinances for the last number of years to raise bulkheads. Anybody that lives down on the bay knows this. You get notices in the mail, you got to get your bulkhead up to par. We started with 4 feet raised, then to 6 feet, now at 8 feet. And I'm sure there'll be questions when this legislation comes through, is that high enough? But that's to help protect us from the ocean side. And even this new regulation in this regard, there's a lot of push for what's called natural, I'm having the wrong word here, what's the living shorelines. Living shorelines, so as opposed to artificial structures. There'll still be questions about how we're going to protect in a number of areas on the bay side. Storm drain outfall pipes. Remember I showed you that the picture of the pipes going underwater. Well, Manny and his team with the flood committee, which actually SHPOA has representation on, Justine's on the flood committee. They've been working hard at trying to figure out how are we going to allow these gravity drain systems to still work, but have the ability to close them off when the reverse is going to happen. And so Stone Harbor's already working on that with a number of projects around 94th Street. Building ordinances. Okay, so you saw this 5 feet that they're talking about increasing. So that's over the current FEMA point where they say you need to build. Stone Harbor has already increased that FEMA point by several feet. So they've already started doing this in their existing building code. And that's why you're seeing some homes that look like they're at the same flood level, maybe on the same street, and one was built a little bit before the other one, and they're at different heights on their first floor level. So Stone Harbor has already been trying to get ahead of this. So we've already, kind of gone out the next 20 or 30 years in terms of the flood projections about where we need to be. So that's a really good thing. Flood mapping to identify hotspots. What's a hotspot? Well, this is a hotspot. This is the marina down at 81st Street, not a storm. This is high tide flooding, okay? So we've gotten a grant and we're starting to take a much more accurate look at where our hotspots are and trying to develop plans to deal with those hotspots. there's multiple activities from FEMA CRS assessment. So Ray Poudry and his team have been identifying things that we can do today to help harden the island. Now, it helps all of us in terms of our flood insurance because we get a higher discount. But they're the things I said that the federal government is encouraging actions as well. They're trying to use the carrot saying, hey, your flood insurance is going to be cheaper if you do the following, saying that to the municipalities. So Stone Harbor has already been doing a lot of this stuff. And in fact, one of the examples is a grading ordinance that we have. So it's not just raising the home, but it's raising the properties and adjusting those properties to funnel storm flow in the direction that you want it to go. So there's still a lot of uncertainty on this. We're still in what's called for, I guess we will be till November, the public comment period, where the state is taking from municipalities, from business owners, from private individuals' comments. We'll see what changes occur after that, and then we'll see what they actually do, with implementation. So you're going to hear more about this. There have been articles in the Herald and other places about this. It's been in the works for a couple years, but now it's a reality. And so we're going to see what happens. So on that, I would like to finish, and we will go to the Q&A, but before we do that, we have our final special $100 Jay's gift certificate. And Justine and I were both there last night. We could have used this.
Okay, white ticket. The number is 067027. That's 067027.
Ah, all right. So in terms of the Q&A, if anybody has a question regarding anything, Lenore's presentation, my presentation, or anything else, we'll use this as a roving mic, so just raise your hand if anybody has a question. We'll get to you with the microphone, and so I see one right up here.
Of course it's the last. Of course it's the last row. I did need this. I need it. That was past tense.
I didn't vote no, so I get to ask the first question. I'm Betsy Yates. I'm Chris Yates' wife. I'd like to know what the cost is of the whole project that's going to start on September 23rd. And how it's being paid for.
Yeah, so you-
It's on right
yeah, no. All right, so can you hear me?
Yeah.
So it's this maintenance dredging project of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So it's federal dollars paying for the Army Corps is paying for it. There's other funds that are coming in from state support, as well as the bulk of the work for the monitoring is actually coming from private philanthropy for us to do the rest of the monitoring. I can't give you a full cost, probably. There's a lot of costs that are internal to the Army Corps that aren't fully priced out, but I'm guessing at around 900,000, it's a number like that.
So that's the total, or you think that's the Army Corps of Engineers?
That's again, if we take out all the research, because we're trying to get it to where you wouldn't need to do the research, the actual dredging's probably a number like that. Call it $1 million for round numbers.
And
So it's
then your costs and the organization's cost to plan it and then monitor it, do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, like I said, so I can't, the planning, the Army Corps uses their own staff to do some of those pieces, so there's not, they're internal costs, so it's hard,
Okay.
it's hard to cost that out.
Okay.
But the monitoring and all that other stuff, it's about $1 million.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
This is the punishment.
Better to run him back and forth.
Hi, I just was wondering about access to the point. Like, is there any kind of timetable? Does DEP have to get involved? Because it looks like it's really bad. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Manny, who's here, to address that. And for those of you, if maybe you don't know, the Point Access Road recently was washed away, so the access to the point is closed off.
Because yesterday at high tide, I mean, there's no access, even if the road was open, it's up to where all the dunes are eroded.
Called sea level rise.
Yes. Mother Nature.
So, okay. So the storm called Ernesto, who didn't actually make landfall on us, had a major impact on the erosion at the point. That hit at a time when there were high tides that were not the high highs, but they were fairly high. And the erosion that we saw there was unlike any other erosion we've had before. We suspect a lot has to do with the sandbar that has been formed off the coast that is splitting some of the flow that's coming, and it creates what we call an eddy current, or these big spinning currents very close to the shoreline. We rebuilt the road right after Ernesto. We waited for the storm to pass. 4 days later, in discussions with the DEP, we built the road, and it washed out on the second high tide. We rebuilt it again, and the same thing happened. Not to be outdone, we did it 2 more times. So we did it 4 times before we realized this is a losing battle. We are monitoring every day, including Saturdays and Sundays. And what we're seeing is that the erosion is actually getting pretty close to the lake. If you know the lake there that's on the right-hand side as you're going in, that lake may be connecting to the ocean very, very soon. That would create Stone Harbor Point Island, and we're not sure what to do after that. The DEP is very well aware of it. They've been monitoring it themselves very closely. At this point, we're still seeing erosion. We're still monitoring it, that it's coming closer and closer to the lake. So at this point, I don't have a timetable for you. We do have sand stockpiled. Secret locations, I can't tell you where. I don't want anybody touching my sand. But we've got sand stockpiled. The rock base that we installed last year is still in pretty decent condition. So the rock base will still hold. We just need to then get the sand back onto it, pack it down, and put the firm surface so that it's drivable. But right now, if we did that, we would just get washed out again. So we're still on hold.
Other question?
Yeah. The project at the end of 94th Street from a couple years ago was a test. Why I got you there.
Okay.
You know, I haven't heard anything in quite a while on that.
Excuse me. So what we did on 94th, and it was actually 93rd, 94th, and 95th, we tried different valves to verify, are they going to work? The one valve has still not arrived, if you could believe it. It's been 2 years that it's been ordered.
Wow.
We still don't have that knife gate valve in our hands. It's, one of those issues where we don't control it. The manufacturer has been telling us for the last 2 years it's coming, and it's not here. So we haven't actually been able to study the knife gate valve yet. The other 2 valves have worked pretty well, and I'll tell you how well they've worked. Wildwood Crest has been watching our study, and they just went out to bid to do basically what we did on all of their street ends. So they bit the bullet and went out. It's an $8 million project just based on what we've done here. So I think that's a pretty high level of confidence that they have. They're still not sure how they're going to operate those valves. So we may have a cost-sharing initiative there between the towns, because I think they need some of our expertise that we have to share with them. But they're working well. It does take a lot of effort in terms of the predictions of it. right? You have to know when to close it and when to open it. And we had one good storm, Ophelia, that showed, that, you know, really showed the differences of when we did what we did. And based on that knowledge, you know, Wild Crest jumped in on what we did on Ophelia. So it's getting there.
Next question?
Thank you.
Rich, right in front of you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jean Hauk, and my question is for Lenore. I'd like to thank you for a really informative, great presentation. I was wondering if hypothetically the channel in Scotch Bonnet were to be dredged, what would the impact of that be on the adjacent marshes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are always worried about deepening the channels and the marsh edges. One of the things, if you drive along in a boat at any low tide, you see the blocks of marsh that are kind of falling off the marsh. That is not normal, that is not healthy. A normal marsh has a nice sloped surface and, you know, the critters walk up the edge. And what we're actually seeing is that's one of the forms of marsh retreat. One of them is it sinks from the top or it's eroding from the side. So there is concern, especially with the dredging that's going to happen by where the Nummi Island Confined Disposal Facility is, Mount Nummi that you see. The dredging is going to come through there, and that's a narrow channel. So they're actually moving the dredge away from that marsh edge, because that channel margin there is really bad. Those of you that boat there, you see the blocks falling in. One of the other projects we did that we just published on is we used dredge material and ran it along the southern edge of Gull Island, and built an edge, built a mud bar against the edge with the idea that that would intercept the waves. But there's a lot of evidence that also suggests the marsh's edges are collapsing because there's too much water on the marsh. You overflood the marsh, the tide drops, and the water's still on the marsh. So as it starts to drain, it creates a pressure that's off the marsh edge. I don't know if that makes sense. So you get too much water on, it's trying to run out, the tide drops so fast that the pressure, the water's holding the marsh edge, but the tide goes out faster than the water can get off the top of the marsh. So we think that's in part what it's causing. So we did this one project that worked really well. We don't see any marsh collapse where we put the berm, but the adjacent marsh is collapsing. So in January, there'll be another dredging project by the Army Corps on the bend by markers 388 to 399 between Sturgeon and Gull, where it's getting shallow again. And that material is going to go to another test to see what we do to try to shore up those marsh edges. So deepening the channel, if it's right against the marsh, isn't great, but it's probably other factors that are causing the marsh failure. But there is no plan right now to dredge Scotch Bonnet. It's only the federal waterways that are being dredged by the Army Corps.
Okay, I'm going to get one more question in the respected time. We've done here.
Thanks, Rich. This is actually just a thank you to the gentleman's question about 94th Street. I mean, I think it's a great example of how the solution didn't cost us a lot of money. I mean, for those who were around then, you know, we spent $700,000 to look at a pump station in that area around 94th. And, you know, it went from 3.5 million to 8 million to 20 million. And then with the solution, with Manny's help and the council at the time, really was a $200,000 solution. It was about $66,000 per street, right? 3 streets, 3 valves. I've talked to a number of people in that area, and they said flooding went down to a trickle, at least on the 300 block of 93rd Street. So there are solutions out there if we kind of work together and collaborate, and they're not necessarily the most expensive solutions. So I think this is a great, these valves, really a manual process with Public Works is actually a really great solution. So hats off to the folks that did that.
And I just want to add to that Stone Harbor was a leader in this. We thank you, Manny, appreciate it. It was really staggering to be looking at a $20 million pump station, which we put the brakes on. But I think we all should be really proud as Stone Harbor residents that, and SHPOA has been pushing us all along, starting back with Wally Bishop, has been pushing us on flood mitigation. And the result of that is we have a number of residents in our town that have so much to add and so much to teach us as a borough. And I don't think Manny would be with us today if we didn't have Wally Bishop back telling us that we needed to focus on flood mitigation. So thank you to SHPOA for pushing the borough. You can see the results both financially and also from an engineering standpoint. And I think we all should be proud of where we are leading flood mitigation efforts.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Tim. I want to first thank Manny, because Manny was not part of the presentation, but in typical Manny fashion, he's always willing to get up and answer a question, provide a lot of information. He's been an invaluable resource for us as we work together through these issues. So again, Manny, thank you for stepping up and joining. Let me thank Dr. Tedesco, please, once more for her participation and for her presentation. I want to thank Geoff, one of our key members on sustainability, but more importantly, somebody that spends an enormous amount of time preparing and educating himself to educate all of us. So Geoff, thank you for your work. And last but not least, I'm going to turn over the mic to my successor, Chris Yates. Ladies and gentlemen, you're in fantastic hands, and I wish you all the best.
So I don't want to take much time, but I do want to thank Rich. I don't think we appreciate enough the passion that he's brought to his role at SHPOA, the passion he brings as a longtime resident of Stone Harbor, and the benefit I think that all of us will enjoy for years to come because of the work he's done. So thank you very much. Appreciate everything you've done. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. We appreciate your participation. We're always available. You've got our contact information on the website, any questions you have. We want to be your advocate on all of these issues, and we want to to work with you to make Stone Harbor the best it can be. So thank you very much.